Child abuse, families, communities, and schools as partners in early childhood development. Introduction. If you would be so kind, please imagine for a moment that you are a new teacher at an elementary school. After your first month of teaching kindergartners, you notice that a little 5-year-old girl came to school with a bruise under her right eye. You ask her, "How did you get that bruise?" She nervously answered, "I walked into a door yesterday when I was not paying attention." However, a week later, you see a similar bruise under her left eye, which she claims happened after she fell at the playground. Moreover, you notice that she has poor hygiene and wears dirty clothes. As the weather drops to 45 degrees, you note that she is not wearing sufficient clothing and is shivering. When you ask, "Where is your coat?" she quickly responds, "I forgot to wear it today." She also frequently forgets her lunch money or to bring a sack lunch. Perceiving that she was hungry, you ensure that she eat lunch with her classmates, and she quickly eats everything on her plate. Based on your personal observation, you suspect that she is being physically neglected and abused. What would you do? Hello, teachers, and welcome. My name is Leo McInnes, and I am a doctoral student at North Central University. Overview. Please allow me to begin this PowerPoint presentation by offering you a brief synopsis of what it entails. First, I will apprise you of the characteristics of an abused child and the professional responsibilities of educator in reporting abuse. Next, I will discuss 7 parenting patterns that may precipitate abuse. Then, I will address the major categories of child abuse, bullying, and cyberbullying. Afterwards, I will issue a public service announcement with regards to emotional abuse. And lastly, I will provide local, state, and national resources for families. Characteristics of an abused child. In general, child abuse is a ubiquitous phenomenon that occurs in all society, leaves everlasting scars, and has various negative outcomes, such as developing a lack of trust, internalizing feelings of worthlessness, and lacking the ability to regulate one's emotion. Given that child abuse is primarily a learned behavior, children of all ages are at potential risk, whereas the most vulnerable are the youngest and disabled. In fact, parents or primary caregivers entail 81.2% of abusers. Thus, teachers must become familiar with the characteristics of child abuse, since reporting mandated suspected incident can literally save a child's life. In this regard, some of the characteristics that an abused child might demonstrate include, but not limited to, a sudden change in behavior, fearfulness of parents, unexplained bruises, bites, or broken bones, difficulties with walking or sitting, and frequent absence from school. Similarly, a few of the characteristics that parents may exhibit that potentially indicate child abuse include unconvincing explanation for injuries, a lack of concern for the child's well-being, yelling, threatening, or exposing the child to domestic violence situation, and in times of crisis, experiencing uncertainties such as the current coronavirus pandemic. Professional responsibility for reporting abuse. Failure to report suspected incidents of child neglect or abuse can cause harm, lifelong suffering, and even death to a child. Thus, for the professional agencies that not only have an ethical, but also a mandated legal responsibility for reporting any reasonable suspicion of child abuse include educators, legal and law enforcement, social service workers, and medical personnel. In fact, of the 4 million reported cases of suspected child neglect or abuse in 2015, over 63% were made by these professions. It should also be noted that as long as any report of suspected case or neglect is made in good faith, the mandated reporter does not need proof that either has actually occurred. Moreover, another area of concern with regards to very young children is exposure to family violence, for this also presents long-term negative outcomes to their holistic development, such as behavior problems, school dropout, and substance abuse. In fact, about 3/4 of early childhood death in the United States occur between the ages of 1 to 3 years old. Thus, early intervention is the most effective way to combat child abuse and neglect. Since young children usually spend the majority of their waking hours at school, educators are in a great position to discern and report suspected cases. 7 parenting patterns that may precipitate abuse. Abusive parents who were raised by maladaptive parents will often have been abused as children. As a result, they would generally lack the necessary skills to interact with, discipline, and teach their own children proper behavior. In fact, they may have learned the 7 parenting patterns as follows. Inappropriate expectation, whereas they think that their children are more advanced than they truly are for their age. For example, a father might force his son to play on a soccer team, even though he lacks the necessary skills to do so. Moreover, abusive parents will often exhibit a lack of empathy for others, especially their own children. Sadly, their children's basic needs will frequently be ignored or disregarded. Another negative parenting pattern is the belief in physical punishment as a necessary tool to correct misbehavior or inadequacy. Interestingly, abusive parents will sometimes engage in parent-child role reversal, whereas they will look for love and support from their children. Unfortunately, this role reversal will circumvent young children from going through the major stages of development. Moreover, abusive parents will occasionally engage in social isolation to solve their own problem. While this is a strategy to protect themselves from being hurt, their children will often be neglected and abused. Similarly, abusive parents may find it very difficult to experience pleasure. Not only do they not enjoy life, but also feel incompetent. And lastly, abusive parenting might originate from intergenerational ties. In other words, when abusive parents fail to develop an attachment with their own parents, they might produce a cycle of negative and abuse that is passed from one generation to another. Child abuse category. The major categories of child abuse include neglect, physical abuse, emotional abuse, and sexual abuse. Physical neglect. According to Stoltenberg, physical neglect can be defined as a failure to meet a child's physical needs, such as providing adequate food, shelter, personal care, clothing, supervision, and medical care. Moreover, the outcome of physical neglect can be just as damaging as physical abuse. In fact, neglect can cause short-term effects that may increase the risk of delays in emotional and cognitive development. On the other hand, the long-term effects of neglect may increase the likelihood of such occurrences as post-traumatic stress disorder, attachment disorder, high-risk behaviors, poor mental health, and petulance. Respectively, PTSD can contribute to reliving significant emotional events, such as trauma neglect, nightmares, paranoia, and intense fear. On the other hand, attachment disorder can circumvent a child's ability to establish secure attachment and positive social relationships. Notwithstanding, high-risk behaviors can result in alcohol abuse, illicit drugs, and promiscuous sexual relationships. Moreover, poor mental health can contribute to events such as poor response to psychotherapy and medication treatment, which may possibly lead to attempted or completed suicide. Notwithstanding, petulance or irritability may eventually give way to an older child or adult committing self-harm as a way of numbing painful childhood memories. Physical abuse. Because physical abuse does not escape any race, ethnicity, socioeconomic status, religion, or academic boundaries, it is difficult to predict when and where it might occur. However, a few signs of physical abuse or injury include, but not limited to, bruises, black eyes, burns, cuts, and fractured bones. While many of these injuries might be accidental in nature, teachers must take great care in observing and inquiring about them to ensure they were not intentionally inflicted, which would constitute physical child abuse. Unfortunately, in 78% of substantiated occurrences of physical child abuse, the parents or primary caregivers were the perpetrators. In this regard, physical child abuse can be defined as a recent act or failure by a parent or caregiver resulting in death, serious physical injury, or imminent risk of physical harm to a child. Moreover, children who are physically abused by a parent or caregiver are at a greater risk of developing deleterious trauma than children who experience physical abuse from unknown perpetrators. Thus, to cope with a parent or caregiver's physical abuse, the child would often resort to cognitive dissonance or self-blame in an effort to actually protect the abuser. Such a strategy would enable the victim to retain a positive image of the abuser in order to maintain the bond or attachment thereof. Emotional abuse. Unlike physical neglect and abuse, emotional abuse is most frequently a difficult type of abuse to either define or detect, for it harms a child's psyche. In fact, a few behaviors that both parents and caregivers engage in include spurning, exploiting, isolating, and terrorizing. In addition, they also abuse their children by withholding their love, encouragement, and acceptance. In other words, children who do not perceive the availability and responsiveness from their parents or caregiver will have a difficult time in establishing a secure attachment with them. Although the emotional bonds between parent and caregivers usually form naturally, they are not dictated by an isolated event, but rather the quality of their bond or attachment as a whole. On the other hand, parents and caregivers who emotionally abuse their children often struggle with substance abuse, domestic violence, and mental health issues. Conversely, a few of the unintended emotional abuses that children face stem from the effects of trauma caused by such events as parent separations and divorces, death of a close family member, and exposure to violence outside the home. Nonetheless, what makes emotional abuse very unique is it can persist outside the other major forms of abuse. Sexual abuse. A working definition of sexual abuse may include when a parent, caregiver, or adult attempts or actually engages in sexual contact, sexual acts, or exploitation with a minor child under 18 for sexual gratification. Oftentimes, a child's words, behavior, and or symptoms will come to the attention of a professional personnel, such as a teacher, school nurse, or counselor, whereas their suspicion will be heightened. In fact, Stewards of Children is a school-based, victim-focused prevention program used to train educators in preventing, recognizing, and responding appropriately to sexual abuse. Similarly, Safe Touches is also a school-based program that teaches second and third graders about the differences between safe and unsafe touches, as well as secret versus surprises. A primary reason for targeting this particular age group is due to the fact that younger children are unable to grasp and transfer this knowledge in ways that actually protect themselves due to their naivety. After all, physical force is rarely used to gain a child's trust and submission. Instead, perpetrator will convince their victim that touching or making contact with their private parts is positive, normal, and secretive. Bullying. In today's society, bullying is a form of behavior that encompasses multifaceted acts that conforms to given situation. According to Bullock, bullying denotes repeated, unprovoked, harmful action by one child or children against another. Moreover, it is important to note that bullies do not have any empathy for their victims when they cause them physical or emotional harm. Regardless of which one, bullying can have long-term consequences for the victim as well as the bully and witness to the violence. While physical bullying primarily involves such acts as hitting, choking, kicking, theft, destroying property, and other forms of aggressive behavior, emotional bullying may entail acts such as threats, verbal abuse, spreading gossip, social exclusion, harassment, and other ways to emotionally denigrate the victim. On the other hand, a commonality between both forms of bullying is that they are intentionally meant to cause personal harm to its victim. Some of the negative effects of being bullied may include, but not limited to, sadness, loneliness, depression, lower academic achievement, increased absence from school, acts of violence like school shooting, suicidal thoughts, intense and specific plans. Cyberbullying. Not only does society rely heavily on digital technology via the internet for commercial use, but also for interaction with families and friends. On the other hand, and while children have bullied others for many decades, they now use the latest digital technology for the mistreating victims by inflicting cyber harm on them. In this regard, cyber harm is simply a continuation of school bullying, but to a much greater degree. In fact, cyber harm may involve damages or threats to one's physical well-being, psyche, economic interest, reputation, and cultural and political stability. Moreover, cyberbullying can be defined as willful and repeated harm inflicted through the use of computers, cell phones, and other electronic devices. Two reasons for the effectiveness of cyberbullying is its repetitive use and delivery in cyberspace. But unlike bullying at school where the victim knows the bully, cyberbullies can hide their identities by using anonymous emails in pursuit of screen name, as well as sending humiliating messages that go viral. In this regard, a few of the social media environments where cyberbullying often takes place include, but not limited to, Twitter, Instagram, and Snapchat, while others entail texting and email from laptops, smartphones, iPads, tablets, and even portable gaming devices. Unfortunately, one of the most devastating consequences of cyberbullying is victims have been known to take their own life. Service announcement. Due to the COVID-19 pandemic, children do not have daily access to teachers and other trained professionals who recognize and intervene in suspected cases of child neglect and abuse. Further, their homes have become a high-stress environment, whereas parents are concerned about their employment uncertainties and economic turmoil. As a result of school closure, children are deprived of needed counseling for potential trauma from emotional abuse. So given the 50% decline in reporting suspected incident, we encourage our local community members to be vigilant and inform us of any sign of child abuse and neglect, especially emotional mistreatment. As advocates for all children, we need to strengthen our partnership now more than ever and meet our duty of ensuring every child's safety and well-being is addressed. For more information, please call us at 352-666-8241 if you have any question or concern about the PSA. Local, state, and national resources. Every day in this nation, the safety and well-being of many children are shattered by child neglect and abuse. However, making resources available to needy families is not the responsibility of any single agency, but rather is shared among local, state, and national agencies. In Hernando County, Florida, their child abuse hotline accepts reports of known or suspected incident of child neglect, abuse, or abandonment 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Some of the resources available for those in need include the Dawn Center, a domestic violence shelter, the United Way, Kids Central, the Florida Health of Hernando County, the Darkness to Light for Child Sexual Abuse. At the state level, some of the resources available include the Florida Department of Education, the Florida Department of Children and Families, the Florida Department of Health, Ounces of Prevention Funds of Florida, and the Prevent Child Abuse America. At the federal agency, some of the available resources include the Child Abuse Prevention and Treatment Act, the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, the National Children's Alliance, the Child Abuse Prevention Center, and the National Foundation to End Child Abuse and Neglect. In summary, child neglect and abuse remains a major problem within the U.S. and worldwide. Over the course of this PowerPoint presentation, I discussed some of them, and some of the key takeaways that you should remember include: child neglect and abuse happens to every segment of this society. Learn the signs and symptoms of child neglect and abuse. Understand the victim of bullying, the witnesses to it, and the bully are all affected by the incident. And early intervention is the key to child neglect and abuse.